Shavua Tov. My name is Sheldon Wilson, and I'm going to go ahead and start, with God's help, a series going through work by Rambam, Moses Maimonides, called Sefer HaMitzvos, which goes through and lists all of the 613 commandments. And that way we can learn together what all of those commandments are. We talk a lot about the 613 commandments, and what does that really mean? What are they? So let's say, just a little thought experiment, if you were to go ahead and decide that you want to create a list of all of the commandments, what would you do? What would you choose? Because we could probably list way more than 613 commandments that show up in the Torah. And you could, some mitzvahs just branch off into other things, and like you might end up with way more than 613. So this was the task that Rambam set out to do. Rambam was in the 12th century. It was a rabbi. Moses Maimonides was his name. Brilliant man. Later became a physician to a sultan, I believe. And just they say that he's second to Moses in the impact that he had on the Jewish people. Nobody had really made a work that covered all of the mitzvahs and detailed them all, giving detailed list of the mitzvahs, who they applied to, what their consequences were, et cetera, et cetera. So he set out to make this work called Mishnah Torah, which is not exactly what we're studying in this class, but I want to tell you because it is the foundation of Sefer HaMitzvos. So Mishnah Torah, if you pick it up, an unabridged copy with translation, you probably fill a bookshelf with Mishnah Torah, and I really do encourage you to read it, to study it. There's two different daily tracks. You can study one chapter in Mishnah Torah, and study one chapter a day. It'll take you 3 years to get through, or you can study 3 chapters a day and get through it in about 11 months. 12 months if you spend 4 weeks on, the first, like the introduction to the book. So he set out to write this work, Mishnah Torah, and now this is to my understanding here. So correct me if I'm wrong. You can leave a comment if you want to. But he decided he wanted to do like an introduction, where almost like a table of contents of all the mitzvot, and he wanted to list all the positive commandments, all the negative commandments, right there in the introduction to the text. And he started looking around, reading and studying through all of the various lists that were already out there, and he wasn't happy with them. Some of them included rabbinic commands. Some of them were using different techniques to derive mitzvot, or even wording them in ways that he wouldn't word them. Anyway, so he wasn't satisfied with the lists that were out there. So Rambam decided that he was going to make his own list. So back to my question. You want to make a list of the 613 commandments. What's your criteria? So Rambam created a set of criteria to come up with the 613 commandments. He knew starting out that he was going to arrive, obviously, at that number, that number 613, which everybody agreed upon is the number of mitzvot. There's 613 commandments that apply for all time. And that list of 613 breaks down into positive and negative commandments. 248 positive commandments, the thou shalt do's, and 365 negative commandments, the thou shalt not do's. The 248 commandments, the sages say in the Talmud, that the 248 positive commandments relate to the limbs of the body, such that that you can do a mitzvah with every limb of your body, and so that's the positive commandments. The negative commandments, that the sages said that there are 365 negative commandments, and it's so that we can't say that that there was ever a day when we didn't have something to abstain from, something that we weren't supposed to do. So that's the breakdown. So if you're going to go through and you're going to come up with your list needs to come to 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments, and so of course that total of 613. So Rambam, when he decided that he was going to go ahead and do this, he said everybody else failed in their list. Nobody else came up with the right list because nobody else had his 14 principles of the 14 principles for deriving the mitzvahs. I'm just going to read two short paragraphs here, and some of it's going to cover a little bit of what I've already described here. What I'm doing here is just reading the introduction to Sefer HaMitzvos today. For the next 3 classes, the next 3 days, we'll be going through each of his principles for choosing what is a mitzvah that belongs in the list of 613. So here's Maimonides, what he says regarding his principles, which we'll cover starting tomorrow with God's help. And now I will begin to discuss the principles totaling 14 to be relied upon in enumerating the mitzvahs. However, I should first mention that the total number of mitzvahs commanded to us by God in the Sefer Torah are 613. There are 248 commandments, like the number of limbs in the human body, and 365 prohibitions, like the number of days in a solar year. This count is mentioned in the Talmud at the end of the tractate Makos, where our sages said 613 commandments were said to Moshe on Har Sinai, 365 corresponding to the days in a solar year, 248 corresponding to a person's limbs. Our sages also interpreted that the comparison between the mitzvos and the number of limbs, that is, as if each limb tells the person, do a mitzvah through me. And on the comparison between the prohibitions and the days of the year, that is as if each day tells a person, don't do any prohibition on my day. Not a single commentary who lists the mitzvahs erred in this enumeration. Or excuse me, not a single commentary who lists the mitzvahs erred in this enumeration. They were totally mistaken, however, in what goes into the list, as I will explain in this work. The reason for this error was because they did not know the 14 principles, which I will now explain. And just real quick, I'll read through those principles, but we're going to go a little bit deeper into them with God's help tomorrow, the first few of those. Principle 1. And remember, these are principles that Maimonides said, what is a mitzvah to go in his list. Don't count in this list rabbinic commandments. Number 2, don't include all laws which are derived from one of the 13 principles of Torah interpretation or from a ribui. That means like some extra word or something in the Torah that you derive another commandment. The third principle: don't count mitzvahs which are not binding upon all generations. The fifth principle: don't count the reason for a mitzvah as a separate mitzvah. Principle 6: when a mitzvah has both a positive commandment and a prohibition, the positive commandment is counted with the positive commandments and the prohibition with the prohibitions. The seventh principle: don't count the details of a mitzvah as separate mitzvahs. The eighth principle: don't count a mere negative statement as a prohibition. The ninth principle: do not count the number of negative or positive commandments, or excuse me, do not count the number of negative or positive statements, but the acts which are prohibited or commanded. The 10th principle: do not count the preliminary steps for the specific purposes that precede the mitzvah as separate mitzvahs. The 11th principle: if one mitzvah includes a number of elements, don't count the elements separately. 12th principle: when a command to do a certain action, when there's a command to do a certain action, don't count each part of the action separately. 13th principle: although a certain mitzvah is performed for a number of days, this does not increase the number of mitzvahs. And the 14th principle: how one counts the modes of punishment as positive mitzvahs. So we're going to go deeper into those with God's help in the coming days. Of course, I will not be posting these on Shabbat or on a Yom Tov, but with God's help, I'll post them either before or after a Shabbat or a Yom Tov. So thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully we will, with God's help, get through this task. And I just want to let you know that this class should be 10 minutes or less is the goal. But we may have some outliers for that, but hopefully we'll keep it shorter. And this may be, in fact, one of the longest classes that we will ever have. All right. Shavua Tov. Have a great night. Thank you for joining us.